"Don't let the oil-stained guy touch a $4 million Bugatti," someone said, and the whole glass showroom laughed just loud enough for Ethan Walker's little girl to hear it. The words floated beneath the chandeliers of Whitmore Dynamics' Manhattan launch event, where polished marble floors reflected camera lights, tailored suits, and the kind of money that made ordinary people feel like they had walked into the wrong life. At the center of it all sat Claire Whitmore's midnight blue Bugatti Chiron Purse Sport, silent, low, and stubborn as a locked secret. 20 engineers had circled it for nearly an hour. They had plugged in diagnostic tablets, opened carbon fiber panels, whispered into headsets, and blamed everything from the fuel mapping to the central control unit. Nothing worked. The engine would cough once, flash 3 warning lights, then die like it had chosen shame over performance. Claire Whitmore stood near the front of the room in a white suit sharp enough to cut the air, her blonde hair pinned back, her face calm in the way powerful people look calm when everything inside them is on fire. Investors checked their watches. Reporters lifted their phones. A $2.8 billion partnership announcement was waiting on that car to start, and the car refused. Ethan had not come for the Bugatti. He had been called to the service alley behind the building to fix a delivery van with a bad starter, the kind of job that paid cash and kept dinner on the table. His gray work shirt was faded at the collar, his boots carried dust from Queens, and his hands still held the honest smell of motor oil and metal. Beside him, 8-year-old Lily hugged a small box of colored pencils to her chest, trying to disappear behind his sleeve. Ethan paused only because he heard the Bugatti try to breathe. Not roar. Not start. Breathe. A half-second delay, a dry click under the ignition cycle, a tiny break in rhythm that did not belong to the engine at all. He turned his head slightly. One of the younger engineers noticed him staring and smirked. "Sir, this is a Bugatti," he said. "Not a lawn mower." A few people laughed. Lily's cheeks turned pink. Ethan did not answer right away. He only placed one steady hand on his daughter's shoulder, not to hold her back, but to remind her that dignity did not need permission to stand still. The showroom lights hummed above them. Outside, traffic moved along 11th Avenue like the world had no idea a room full of brilliant people was about to be humbled by a man they had already dismissed. Claire's eyes shifted toward Ethan, cold and curious. "Are you with my engineering team?" she asked. Ethan looked at the car, then at her. "No, ma'am." "Then why are you looking at my vehicle like you know something they don't?" The room tightened around the question. Ethan's voice stayed quiet. "Because they keep trying to diagnose what the computer says." He glanced once at the Bugatti's rear intake, listening to the fading tick beneath the silence. "But the car is telling a different story." The chief engineer gave a short laugh. "That's adorable." Ethan nodded once, accepting the insult without carrying it. Then the Bugatti clicked again, soft but wrong. His expression changed. Not fear. Not pride. Recognition. "Don't start it again," he said. Claire lifted her chin. "Excuse me?" Ethan took one step forward, just enough for the nearest security guard to tense. "If you start it again, you'll burn the secondary control bridge." For the first time that morning, nobody laughed. Claire Whitmore did not move at first. She simply studied Ethan Walker as if he were a smudge on a perfect window that somehow knew the weather before the sky changed. Around her, the engineers exchanged looks, half irritated, half uncertain, because confidence is easy when no one outside the circle questions it. The chief engineer, Martin Kessler, stepped forward with his tablet tucked under one arm. "Secondary control bridge?" he repeated, smiling without warmth. "That is not even the failure code." Ethan kept his eyes on the Bugatti. "I know." "Then you are guessing." "No, then what are you doing?" Ethan listened to the cooling metal, the soft electrical tick buried under the showroom's expensive silence. "Paying attention." That answer annoyed Kessler more than an argument would have. He turned toward Claire, lowering his voice, but not enough. "Miss Whitmore, with respect, we cannot allow a roadside mechanic to interfere with a prototype security system. We have 20 certified specialists here." Ethan looked down when Lily's fingers tightened around his sleeve. He could feel her embarrassment, small and hot, traveling through her hand. She had heard men talk down to him before. At gas stations. At repair shops. In apartment offices where rent notices came folded in white envelopes. But this room made it sharper. Everything here shined. Everything here had a badge, a title, a reason to look past him. Back in Queens, Ethan's garage sat beneath a row of aging brick apartments near a laundromat that smelled of warm detergent and rain-soaked sidewalks. He fixed yellow cabs, delivery vans, old pickup trucks, and the kind of family cars that came in with 3 warning lights and a prayer. He never charged mothers for 5-minute fixes. He never mocked people who did not understand engines. He kept a coffee can behind the counter labeled Lily's College Fund, though some weeks it collected more hope than money. Every morning, he woke before sunrise, packed Lily's lunch, braided her hair badly but lovingly, and told her the same thing before school. "You do not have to be loud to be strong." She would roll her eyes and smile. "I know, Daddy." "Quiet dignity." He would nod. "That is right." But quiet dignity had a cost. It meant swallowing insults that tasted like rust. It meant walking away from men who mistook kindness for weakness. It meant never telling Lily that once, years ago, rooms like this had opened for him before he touched the door. Once, Ethan Walker had spoken in laboratories where million-dollar machines waited for his approval. Once, his signature had lived inside safety systems no ordinary mechanic would ever see. Then came one buried warning, one corporate decision, 1 year of grief, and a promise made beside a hospital bed to raise his daughter with clean hands, even if the world never called him brilliant again. In the showroom, Claire noticed the way Ethan lowered himself slightly beside Lily, shielding her without making a show of it. That quiet gesture reached her before his words did. "Daddy," Lily whispered, "maybe we should go." Ethan brushed a thumb over the back of her hand. "Maybe." Then the Bugatti's dashboard pulsed again, a brief amber flicker near the ignition indicator. Ethan's eyes lifted. "But not yet." Claire Whitmore had built her life around control, and control was the one thing slipping from her hands beneath the white lights of that showroom. She stood with her shoulders square, her face calm, her voice measured, but inside, every second struck like a clock in an empty room. The Bugatti was not just a display piece. It had belonged to her father, Richard Whitmore, the man who taught her how to read balance sheets before she learned how to parallel park, the man who believed machines had moral language if people were humble enough to listen. On her 16th birthday, he had taken her to a private track outside Albany, placed her hand on the hood of a silver race car, and said, "Claire, a good machine tells the truth. Only people try to hide it." She had laughed back then because she was young, because grief had not yet made ordinary sentences sacred. Now, years later, his words returned through the dead silence of a $4 million car that refused to perform for cameras, investors, and a room full of men paid to know better. Martin Kessler cleared his throat. "Miss Whitmore, we should move the announcement to the secondary stage." Another engineer nodded quickly. "We can blame a firmware delay. Or a transport issue," someone added. "The press will accept that." Claire turned her eyes toward them. "Will the car accept it?" No one answered. That was the trouble with polished people in polished rooms. They always had language for failure, but rarely had the courage to face it. Behind her, the giant screen still displayed the words Whitmore Dynamics, the future of intelligent motion. Beneath those words sat the Bugatti, silent as a witness. Claire looked again at Ethan, at the faded work shirt, the tired boots, the steady eyes that seemed neither impressed nor intimidated. He did not look like the men who usually stood near her, men with degrees framed behind glass and voices shaped by boardrooms. He looked like a father who had missed sleep, skipped meals, and still remembered how to be gentle. That unsettled her more than it should have. "You said the secondary bridge would burn," she said. "Why?" Kessler stepped in before Ethan could answer. "Because he heard a click and invented a theory." Ethan did not look at him. "Because the ignition delay is not mechanical." Then what is it? Claire asked. A timing conflict. In plain English, the pressure sensor is telling the control unit one story, and the security update is forcing the system to believe another. The engine is not broken. It is protecting itself from bad instructions. The room grew still in a different way. Not respectful yet. Not convinced. But listening. Lily looked up at her father with the careful hope of a child who had seen the world underestimate someone she loved too many times. Claire took one step closer to the car. Her reflection stretched across the Bugatti's curved paint, perfect on the surface, fractured by the showroom lights. 20 engineers missed that, she said. Ethan's voice stayed low. Maybe they were trying to prove they were right. He paused, gentle but firm. Sometimes the machine gets quieter when the room gets louder. For the first time all morning, Claire did not hear arrogance in a man's certainty. She heard grace. And somewhere deep inside the silence, the lesson her father left behind began to breathe again. Martin Kessler's smile disappeared just long enough for everyone near the front row to notice. It was a small thing, almost nothing, but in a room built on status, even the smallest crack in confidence made a sound. He adjusted his glasses, lifted his tablet, and said, Miss Whitmore, this is becoming inappropriate. We have protocols. Ethan nodded once. You should. We have proprietary systems. You do. And you have no clearance. Ethan looked at him then, not with anger, not with challenge, but with the steady patience of a man who had learned that pride often wears a lab coat when it is afraid. Then do not give me access. Kessler gave a thin laugh. Gladly. Ethan turned slightly toward Claire. Just pull the raw ignition sequence from the last 3 start attempts. No interface summary. No filtered report. Raw numbers. Kessler's jaw tightened. That data will not mean anything to you. Lily shifted beside her father, and as she did, the small cardboard box of colored pencils slipped from her hand. It hit the marble floor with a soft crack, scattering red, blue, yellow, and green across the shine beneath a row of Italian leather shoes. No one moved. A woman holding a press badge glanced down, then back at her phone. One investor stepped around the pencils as if they were crumbs. Lily dropped to her knees quickly, her face burning. Ethan bent down with her. He did not sigh. He did not apologize for her being a child in a room where adults had forgotten how to be kind. He simply picked up the yellow pencil, then the red one, then the blue one, placing each back into the torn box with care. The room watched, some amused, some impatient, Claire silent. Daddy, Lily whispered. I am sorry. Ethan's voice was softer than the lights above them. You did nothing wrong. Everyone is staring. Let them. He handed her the last pencil. How people treat small moments tells you what they do with big power. Those words reached Claire before she could defend herself from them. Something in her face changed, barely, like a window shade lifting an inch. Kessler cleared his throat again, louder this time. Touching moment. But we have an event collapsing. Ethan stood slowly. Then stopped performing and checked the sequence. Kessler stepped closer. You are out of line. No. Ethan's voice did not rise. The timing is. A murmur moved across the showroom. 3 words. Simple. Calm. Impossible to laugh at without sounding foolish. Claire turned to her lead engineer. Pull the raw sequence. Miss Whitmore, he said, with all due respect, now. The command landed clean and cold. Kessler hesitated, then tapped angrily across his tablet and sent the data to the main diagnostic screen. Lines of numbers filled the display behind the Bugatti, sterile and blue against the white stage. Most people saw nonsense. Ethan saw rhythm. He saw the same half-second hesitation he had heard in the metal, a pulse arriving late. Where obedience should have been instant. He pointed, not touching the screen. There. Kessler frowned. That is within tolerance. Ethan shook his head. Not for this engine. Another engineer leaned in. It is only 0.7 seconds. Ethan looked at Claire. At 200 miles per hour, 0.7 seconds is not small. It is a lifetime. The showroom went quiet again, deeper this time, because even people who did not understand machines understood the weight of a sentence like that. Claire Whitmore stared at the number glowing on the diagnostic screen, and for the first time that morning, the room did not belong to her title, her money, or her company. It belonged to the truth. 0.7 seconds. A delay smaller than a breath, smaller than a blink, yet large enough to humble 20 brilliant minds in tailored jackets. Martin Kessler recovered first, because pride always tries to stand back up before wisdom has finished speaking. That variance still does not explain the system lock, he said. It explains the first lock, Ethan replied. Not the second. Kessler frowned. There is no second lock. Ethan turned his eyes toward the Bugatti's dashboard. There is if your security patch treats the pressure mismatch as tampering. One of the younger engineers looked down at his tablet, suddenly typing faster. Another leaned toward the screen. Claire heard the room changing. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It was more like ice beginning to loosen on a river. Show me, she said. Kessler stiffened. Miss Whitmore, I strongly recommend we pause this conversation. I asked him. Ethan did not step forward like a man claiming victory. He stepped forward like a man approaching something wounded. He kept his hands visible, respectful of the machine, respectful of the room, even if the room had not been respectful of him. Your update added an authentication check between the pressure sensor and the drive control unit. Good idea. But the bridge is asking for confirmation after the sensor has already adjusted for heat soak. The two signals are both honest. They are just arriving out of order. Claire narrowed her eyes. So the car thinks it is being lied to. Ethan nodded. Exactly. A strange silence followed. Not because everyone understood the engineering, but because everyone understood betrayal. Claire looked at the Bugatti, and for one quiet second, it felt less like a machine and more like a mirror. Her father had warned her about this kind of failure, not the technical kind, but the human kind. Systems break when people stop listening. Companies break the same way. Kessler gave a short, uncomfortable laugh. Even if that were true, the fix would require a full rollback and factory authorization. Ethan looked at the screen. No. It requires a manual timing correction and a bridge reset. That is impossible without the master console. Not impossible. You do not have the tools. I have enough. You do not know this architecture. Ethan's eyes shifted for the briefest moment, and something old passed across his face, something Claire could not name. Pain, maybe. Memory. A door he had no intention of opening. Then he said, I know the bones of it. The older engineer near the rear of the group, a gray-haired man named Howard Mills, looked up sharply. Until then, he had said almost nothing. Now his face had gone pale, not with fear, but recognition trying to rise through years of dust. What did you say your name was? Howard asked. Ethan did not answer right away. Lily looked from the old engineer to her father, sensing that the air had changed again. Ethan gently squeezed her shoulder. Walker, he said. Ethan Walker. Howard's tablet lowered slowly to his side. The name traveled through him like a note from a song he had not heard in a decade. Claire noticed. So did Kessler. So did half the room. Do you know him? Claire asked. Howard swallowed, his voice barely above the hum of the lights. I used to know of him. Ethan looked down, as if hoping the floor might be kinder than memory. Kessler scoffed, but it came out weaker this time. This is absurd. Are we fixing a vehicle or telling ghost stories? Ethan looked at Claire, calm and tired and steady. Give me 5 minutes, he said. No parts. No excuses. If I am wrong, I will walk out the same way I came in. Claire studied the man before her, the oil on his hands, the grace in his restraint, the daughter standing close enough to trust him with her whole world. Then she reached into her pocket and held out the key. 5 minutes, she said. And nobody laughed. Ethan took the key from Claire Whitmore with the same quiet care he used when handing Lily a warm cup on winter mornings. He did not smile. He did not look around to enjoy the attention. Men who need applause usually move too fast, but Ethan moved slowly, respectfully, like every second carried responsibility. The showroom seemed to shrink around him. Phones were raised, reporters leaned forward, investors stopped whispering, and 20 engineers watched the man they had dismissed step toward the machine they had failed to understand. Martin Kessler folded his arms. 5 minutes will not rewrite physics. Ethan glanced at the diagnostic screen. No. He set the key on the console edge. But it might correct pride. The words were not loud, yet they landed everywhere. Claire heard them. Lily heard them. Even Kessler heard them, because his face tightened like a door closing from the inside. Ethan asked for a basic service cable, not the master console, not the private factory kit, just a plain connection line and access to the raw bridge log. The younger engineer hesitated, then looked at Claire. She nodded. The cable was handed over. Ethan knelt beside the driver's side panel, careful not to scratch the carbon fiber, and connected the line with hands that looked rough enough for old trucks but precise enough for surgery. The screen flickered. Numbers spilled down in clean white rows. To most of the room, it looked like rain. To Ethan, it sounded like music written slightly off-tempo. First start attempt, he said. Sensor warm. Bridge cold. Conflict ignored. He tapped once. Second attempt. Security layer flags the mismatch. Another tap. Third attempt. Protective lock prepares to isolate the control bridge. Kessler stepped closer despite himself. That sequence is hidden behind encrypted mapping. Not hidden, Ethan said. Just buried. Claire watched his hands. They did not tremble. They did not rush. There was no showmanship in him, no hunger to embarrass anyone. That made the moment heavier. He was not proving them small. He was proving the truth large. Lily stood beside Claire now without realizing she had moved there, her colored pencil box held against her chest. Claire looked down at the child, then back at Ethan, and something softened behind her polished expression. Does he always get this quiet? She asked. Lily nodded. Only when something matters. Ethan entered 3 manual corrections, each one followed by a pause, a breath, a careful listen. The Bugatti's dashboard dimmed, then woke again with fewer warning lights. A soft chime rang from inside the cabin. Howard Mills whispered. No way. Kessler's voice came out thin. That could be temporary. Ethan did not answer. He placed one palm lightly above the console, not touching any switch yet, waiting for the final bridge confirmation to return. The showroom lights hummed. Outside the windows, Manhattan traffic kept moving, yellow cabs and black sport utility vehicles sliding through the afternoon as if nothing sacred was happening behind the glass. Then the screen displayed one line, bridge timing accepted. Ethan stood. He handed the cable back. No, he said gently. It will listen. Claire held her breath as he pressed the start button. For half a second, there was nothing. Then the Bugatti came alive, not with a cough, not with a warning, but with a deep, clean roar that rolled across the marble floor and up into the chandeliers. Nobody cheered. Nobody laughed. Nobody even moved. 20 engineers, 3 investors, 6 reporters, and 1 CO stood frozen in a silence too honest to interrupt. Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Ethan only stepped back from the car, as if the victory belonged to the machine, not to him. And in that stillness, Howard Mills stared at Ethan Walker like a ghost had returned carrying the truth. The sound of the Bugatti faded into a steady idle, smooth and confident, as if it had never been doubted at all. That was the strange mercy of machines. Once corrected, they did not hold grudges. People were different. People remembered who laughed, who looked away, who stepped over a child's fallen pencils, and who stood quietly when insult would have been easier than grace. Ethan Walker unplugged nothing dramatic, closed no panel with flair, and offered no speech. He simply checked the dashboard, listened once more, then stepped back beside Lily. She slipped her small hand into his, and he squeezed it without looking down, because if he looked at her too long, the tears in her eyes might break something in him he had worked very hard to keep steady. Claire Whitmore moved toward the car slowly. The white suit that had made her look untouchable minutes earlier now seemed almost too bright for the silence around her. She glanced at the screen, at the cleared warnings, at the engine data stabilizing in perfect rhythm, then at the man in the faded work shirt. "How did you know?" she asked. Martin Kessler answered before Ethan could. "Lucky inference." The words sounded weak the moment they left his mouth. Howard Mills turned sharply. "No, Martin!" Kessler blinked. "Excuse me?" Howard's voice shook, not from fear, but from the weight of memory finally refusing to stay buried. "That was not luck." The room shifted toward him. Howard was not a loud man. He had the tired posture of someone who had spent too many years choosing job security over truth. But now his eyes stayed fixed on Ethan, and his face carried an old shame. "I was a junior systems analyst at Northline Performance 12 years ago," he said. Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Claire noticed. Lily did too, though she did not understand why. Howard continued, "We were building the first adaptive safety logic that later became the foundation for half the systems this industry uses now. There was one engineer who kept warning management about timing conflicts between sensor authentication and emergency control bridges." Kessler's tablet lowered. Claire went still. "What engineer?" she asked. Howard swallowed. "Ethan Walker." A low murmur spread through the room, softer than gossip, heavier than surprise. Ethan looked down at Lily, then at Howard. "You do not have to do this." Howard's eyes filled with regret. "Yes, I do." Claire's voice was quiet. "Why have I never heard this?" Howard looked at her with a sadness that made him appear older. "Because after the test failure, the company needed a name to blame. He gave them warnings. Written warnings. They buried them." Nobody moved. Even Kessler seemed to forget how to breathe. Ethan's hand tightened around Lily's, not enough to hurt, just enough to anchor himself in the present. He had spent years not saying it. Years fixing minivans and school buses and delivery trucks while men who knew better built careers on silence. He had chosen peace because his daughter needed a father more than the world needed another angry man. Claire looked at Ethan differently now. Not like a mechanic. Not like a mystery. Like a man standing in the wreckage of an old injustice with his dignity still intact. "My father knew your name," she whispered. Ethan's eyes lifted. "Richard Whitmore?" Claire nodded slowly. "He wrote something once. Walker was right. We should have listened." The words landed harder than applause ever could. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second, and when he opened them, he was not healed, not yet, but the room had finally stopped laughing long enough for the truth to stand up. Claire Whitmore did not speak for several seconds, because some truths do not enter a room gently. They arrived carrying names, dates, signatures, and all the silence people used to cover them. The Bugatti idled behind her with perfect rhythm now, a living reminder that the man everyone had dismissed had understood in 5 minutes what pride had missed in an hour. Howard Mills stepped closer, his tablet trembling slightly in his hand. "There are archived reports," he said. "Northline buried most of them when the board changed, but copies existed. I saw them. I saw his warnings." Martin Kessler's face had lost its color. "Howard, be careful." Howard turned to him with quiet exhaustion. "I have been careful for 12 years. That is the problem." Ethan looked away toward the glass wall, where the city moved outside in bright lines of traffic and late afternoon sunlight. He had imagined this moment many times in the early years, back when anger still kept him awake, back when Lily was a baby asleep in a thrift store crib, back when every bill felt like another judge reading a sentence. He imagined someone saying his name correctly. He imagined someone admitting they had known. But life had humbled his imagination. Eventually, he stopped waiting for justice and started packing school lunches. He learned the rhythm of ordinary grace, peanut butter sandwiches cut diagonally, bedtime stories after 12-hour shifts, used sneakers cleaned with dish soap so Lily would not feel poor on picture day. Claire watched his face and saw no hunger for revenge. That unsettled her more than bitterness would have. A bitter man was easy to understand. A dignified man was harder, because dignity asked something of everyone near it. "Why did you never come forward?" she asked. Ethan gave a small, tired smile. "I did." The answer hung there. Howard lowered his eyes. Ethan continued. "I sent documents. I made calls. I sat in 3 waiting rooms with folders full of proof. Then my wife got sick, and one day I had to choose between chasing men who had already chosen their story and holding together the only family I had left." Lily leaned against him, silent now, old enough to understand sadness even when she did not know every detail. Ethan rested a hand on her shoulder. "After that, I did not want my daughter growing up beside a war I could not win." Claire's expression softened, but her voice stayed clear. "My father did not believe Northline's version." Ethan looked at her. "Then why did nothing change?" "It was not accusation. That made it worse." Claire swallowed. "Because he died before he could finish what he started." Howard nodded slowly. "Richard Whitmore asked for those files. He knew something was wrong." The showroom felt less like a launch event now and more like a chapel where confession had arrived late but not too late. Cameras were still raised, but even the reporters seemed careful, as if noise would cheapen the moment. Claire turned toward the investors, the engineers, the glowing company logo, and finally back to Ethan. "Mr. Walker," she said, and this time the name carried weight. "I cannot undo what they took from you." Ethan looked at Lily before answering. "No one can." Claire nodded. "But I can decide what this company does with the truth now." Kessler opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, the room did not need his voice. Claire stepped onto the small platform beside the Bugatti, not as a woman protecting an event, but as someone finally willing to interrupt a lie. "Keep the cameras on," she said. Then she looked at Ethan, and the silence became something almost holy. Claire Whitmore stood beside the restored Bugatti, but she no longer looked at it like the center of the event. The machine had done its part. It had revealed the flaw, carried the silence, and handed the room back to the people who needed to decide what kind of truth they were willing to live with. She faced the cameras, the investors, the engineers, and the little girl standing beside her father with colored pencils pressed against her heart. "Today," Claire said, her voice steady enough to travel to the farthest corner of the showroom, "this company was saved by a man we almost escorted out the door." No one moved. Ethan lowered his eyes, uncomfortable beneath public attention, but Lily looked up at him as if the whole world had finally learned the language she already knew. Claire continued. "Ethan Walker identified a failure that our systems missed, corrected it without replacing a single part, and protected a vehicle that means more to me than its price tag. But that is not the most important truth in this room." Howard Mills stepped forward and placed his tablet on the platform edge. "I will provide sworn documentation," he said quietly. "Archived reports. Internal warnings. Names." Martin Kessler looked as if he wanted to object, but dignity had finally outnumbered ego. Claire turned slightly toward him. "Effective immediately, all safety review records connected to Northline Performance and Whitmore Legacy Systems will be reopened by an independent ethics board." Then she looked back at Ethan. "And this company will publicly correct the record." The words landed not like thunder, but like rain after years of drought. Ethan's face stayed calm, yet his breathing changed. For 12 years, he had carried a locked room inside him, filled with documents no one read, apologies no one gave, and a version of himself the world had misplaced. Claire stepped down from the platform and stopped a few feet away from him. "Mr. Walker, I would like to offer you a position at Whitmore Dynamics, not as a consultant, not as a temporary mechanic, but as Director of Safety Integrity and Engineering Ethics. We need someone who knows what happens when people ignore the quiet warning before the public failure." The showroom held its breath. Ethan looked at Lily. In her eyes, he saw apartment walls, late rent notices, second-hand shoes, burnt pancakes, bedtime prayers, and every small brave day they had survived together. "Daddy," she whispered, "Mom would want them to know the truth." That was what broke him, not the job, not the cameras, not the apology wrapped in corporate authority. It was his daughter giving him permission to stop hiding from a past he had never deserved. Ethan nodded once slowly. "I will help," he said. "But not for reputation." Claire's eyes softened. "Then for what?" Ethan looked around the room, at the engineers who had laughed, at the reporters who had gone quiet, at the car now idling with perfect obedience. "For the next person who tells the truth before it becomes expensive." No one clapped at first. The silence was too full. Then Howard began, one quiet clap, followed by another, then another, until the sound rose across the marble floor not as celebration, but as respect. Lily wrapped her arms around Ethan's waist, and he bent to kiss the top of her hair. Claire watched them, and for the first time in years, the empire she inherited felt less like a monument, and more like a responsibility. Outside, Manhattan kept moving, bright and restless, but inside that glass showroom, something sacred had slowed the world down. A single father had not shouted. He had not begged to be seen. He had listened, waited, and stood in quiet dignity until the truth found its voice. And when it did, even the people who once laughed had no words left, only silence, and in that silence, respect finally arrived.